My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guests are State Representative Julie Casimiro, a Democrat representing District 31 that covers parts of North Kingstown and Exeter, and Michael Chippendale, a Republican from District 40 that includes parts of Foster, Gloucester, and Coventry. Did I leave any parts out for anybody?
You got it.
I believe both of you have been on State of the State before, but welcome back.
Thank you so much for having us.
Our format is going to be, I'm going to ask our guests a question and I'll alternate between them to get a response to those, and I hope that that'll work for you. What bill or bills passed the General Assembly in the last session that you regard as particularly significant? Representative Casimiro, anything stand out?
Yes, I am particularly proud of the work that we did for DCYF. That was done in a very bipartisan fashion, and Whip Chippendale and I worked closely together on that, but we did give an additional $10 million to DCYF to fund 90 new positions. I think that we funded the work that we did to fund body cams for police. We not only we gave them the money to do so, so I think that was particularly good legislation, and I think the pay equity bill was also a significant bill for us to pass.
Is that body cam bill for all the departments?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's $15 million for anyone who wants to buy body cams.
And you, Rep. Chippendale?
Significant passages. I would agree with my colleague that certainly what we did to assist DCYF reach the goals that they desperately need to reach was probably one of the more profound things on the positive side that happened. Just off the top of my head, a couple of things I think were really good were my colleague Rep. Newberry has been putting in a civics literacy bill for probably at least 6 years, and this year it did pass into law where the curriculum in the state of Rhode Island will include a literacy regarding civics. How does government work, which is extremely important. And then there was also a financial literacy bill along the same veins where we're adding a very important element to the educational system where our students will hopefully learn how to manage their finances and learn how financing works. So those are three that off the top of my head do jump out as significant and positively significant, yes.
Are you getting any indication whether or not you're going to be called back for a special session in September, Representative Chippendale?
No one calls Republicans and asks those types of questions,
Okay.
Dick.
Well,
so,
then I'll ask the Democrat.
yeah, I have received no such phone call.
Anything?
I'm hearing that it's not likely that we're going back. I don't believe that if we do go back, it's going to be for any large amount of bills. I think it would only be for a couple of bills. But it's my understanding that we're still far apart on the marijuana legislation. So we're probably not going to go back, but that's just what I'm hearing.
So the marijuana, that would be the legalization of recreational
Yes.
marijuana. Mm-hmm. And you say you're far apart when you say, you mean both, there's two opposite camps on the...
Yes, the governor has what he wants to see as a plan. The Senate has their plan, and I believe the House is trying to work to get it somewhere in the middle so both parties are happy. But from what I understand, we're not even close to that.
Okay, so it might be handled in the next session when you go back in the winter. Okay. If there was a special session, well, let me put it this way. Were there any bills that you sponsored during the regular session that didn't even get out of committee? Representative Chippendale?
Certainly, there were a few that I did sponsor that didn't make it out. However, as a general rule, I do not submit a lot of legislation. I believe that which legislates least legislates best. So I do respond to my towns and to individuals who will ask me to submit legislation, or if there's something passionate to me. This year, one thing that was passionate for me was that we were not allowing disabled students to attend CCRI under the Promise program. So that was pretty much the only piece of legislation I wrote, which was thankfully incorporated into an existing bill and became law. So
it did come out, yeah. So,
it did,
yeah. Okay. And what about you, Representative?
I have a lot of bills that didn't come out of committee. But one of them that I was really disappointed with was a Department of Defense bill for child abuse and neglect. The bill would allow DCYF to report incidences of child abuse and neglect in the military prior to adjudication so that the military can intervene and provide supports to those families. It passed the Senate overwhelmingly, and it just never made it out of committee on the House side.
What committee would hear that?
Judiciary.
Judiciary. You sit on the Judiciary Committee. So what that bill would have, in other words, if DCYF was called in to a situation that involved the military family, say at Newport, that they would report it to the chain of command in the military?
As soon as the incident is reported, and not wait for adjudication. And it had tremendous support from the Department of Defense. They even called in and testified in support of the bill. It was their brainchild, and they're trying to get it passed, across the country. It just floundered in judiciary this year for some reason. To me, it seems like such a no-brainer.
I was about to make that comment myself. So, the General Assembly passed a $13.1 billion budget for the next fiscal year, which is actually, I think, about $2 billion more than Governor McKee asked for. Why? Representative Chippendale?
Yeah, I'm not going to be able to give you a why on that. I can certainly elaborate on how I think we got there, and it has a lot to do with the influx of money that we ordinarily would not have had. Certainly there was federal money that came in by the bucket load in reaction to the health crisis. There were bonds that the state had taken out relative to the health crisis that is authorized by our own state statutes. So there was an influx of cash, and frankly, it was being spent in almost a triage mode. So it was very difficult to keep track of, was the federal money being spent in this way? It was a violation of their terms and so forth and whatnot. And then at the end, the idea is to reconcile all that, to make sure that we did spend the money appropriately, which I'm sure that process will take a little bit, but is still going on. That's how I think we got to that ballooned size. I'm frankly not sure how we continue to support that.
I agree with my Republican colleague.
Oh, thank you.
It is federal dollars that has ballooned the budget for us. Once we get past COVID, we're not there yet. That money will dry up, and we'll see a decrease in it. But yes, those are federal dollars that ballooned the budget because of COVID.
So the next obvious question is, I think you started to allude to it, is will the $13.1 billion budget become the starting point next year, because all of the agencies and special interest groups are going to love the money they got? And are you going to start with that, or will it be somewhere between 10 billion and 13 billion?
I would have to assume it's going to be somewhere between 10 and 13. We can't start at a $13 billion budget and potentially go up. We're not going to have that kind of money. So I think that I'm not on the finance team. I don't create the budget for the governor, but I would assume that that's the safest way to build the budget next year.
Some folks call me cynical, but I like to consider myself pragmatic. Certainly in the time I've been there, I've never seen a budget go down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's my fear, is that somewhere along the line, every time they start talking about reducing something, then the special interest group or the agency or the department that's affected, it says, oh, we can't get along with any less than we have this year. After amid much fanfare, I should say, Governor McKee signed 3 gun control bills this year. 2 of them were passed with his signature, 2 became law without his signature. Will any of the 3 bills do anything to reduce violent crime in Providence, Representative Chippendale?
The 2 that passed with his signature will do nothing to stop any sort of violent crime or crime in general. The 3rd, which he refused to sign, is a bill that mandates that the Attorney General provide the General Assembly with a comprehensive report of all gun crimes and their disposition throughout the judiciary process in the state of Rhode Island, so that we can better legislate on these issues rather than emotionally legislate on these issues, which regrettably is all that we've ever done in the past 11 years that I've been there. It's been an emotional reaction. The bill we will not see the first report regrettably until after 2022. We'll see it in 2023, and that was at the behest of the Attorney General. They didn't want to put it out, I suspect because he didn't want the data to come up before the election. But I think it will demonstrate that we have an anemic rate of prosecuting gun crimes in the state of Rhode Island. And the news is replete with stories of this every day, where police arrest someone for a gun crime and then literally weeks later they're arrested again. Or, as we saw in Newport, they're arrested for a gun crime in Middletown a month earlier, and then they stab someone to death in Newport. We need to put criminals in jail, and this report will help us understand where the flaws are in regards to firearm crimes, yes.
You're nodding assent as Mike Chippendale is speaking, so you agree with
I do agree with Chippendale. None of these bills are going to stop crime shootings in Providence. I think the No Guns on School Ground bill is not going to prevent a school shooting. It goes after concealed carry people. I believe that the database bill that the governor didn't sign is going to give us the information that we need. And I don't remember if you're on judiciary or not, but during the judiciary hearing, when that bill was introduced and we were passing it out of committee, someone actually said, this is going to stop us from passing common sense gun legislation. No, it's going to help us create common sense gun legislation that will actually help us clean up crime. But no, I don't think any of the bills are going to stop what's going on in Providence. I don't see it happening. There's bigger issues in Providence that we need to address, and it's people with illegal guns, not people who have concealed carry permits. And I think we need to address that before we address anything else.
Am I mistaken? Wasn't there a law already that required the Attorney General to submit some sort of report on those things, and he just hasn't done it, or he's always tardy? When I say he, his department.
There was a law passed. In fact, I had written that law, and it did pass. However, it wasn't specific enough, and the letter of the law and the law are two very different things. And this particular Attorney General played by the letter of the law and gave basically worthless information to the General Assembly, information we could do nothing with. It wouldn't teach us anything. So we came back. I worked with Representative Casey, who spearheaded the entire drive to get that bill passed. We made it impossible for him not to provide us with real, viable data.
Well, that data will not be available, as you said, until after the election in 2022.
Yes, that was the objection from the Attorney General's office. They didn't want it.
I'll be darned.
I am saying it's for the election. He did not say that. I want to make that clear.
Yep. So, do either of you believe that any of the gun control measures that are very much desired by those folks that favor gun control, for example, the assault weapons ban, the high-capacity magazine ban, if you had a special session, can these bills be forced out of committee so that it brings it to a vote again?
No bills are going to be forced out of committee during special session. We're going to go just to clean up a couple. Nothing will be forced out of committee.
Yeah, I mean, the process is still the same if we went back in a special session or not. I frankly, under what they did describe as the potential special session, there wouldn't be enough time for those processes to play out properly. So I agree with my good colleague that there wouldn't have been an opportunity for that to happen.
Good to know. Now, the commission that is, I call the super committee overseeing primary and secondary schools in the state, came out with a mandate for masks in all schools. Now, the Rhode Island Department of Education's chief legal counsel advised this commission that it lacked legal authority to issue a statewide mandate to wear masks. But State Education Commissioner Angelica Infante Green said she wasn't sure they had the legal authority to do this, but they're going forward anyway and would defend their decision in court if necessary. What's wrong with this picture? We don't have the power to do this, but we're going to do it anyway and fight it out in court. Am I wrong?
That was the position they took. In addition to them not possessing the authority to make such a decision, they did it at a meeting where there was no vote advertised, so they completely violated the Open Meetings Act. So on two fronts, that decision was null and void. However, as we learned, the governor interceded, and with a very questionable and dubious executive order, seems to feel he overrode those objections and now has paved the way for this mask mandate.
I want to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but Representative Casimiro, do you see where I'm going with this? I mean, you have an appointee bureaucrat who acknowledges they don't have the authority, we're going to do it anyway and defend it in court. Do you see this as a dangerous trend, or am I overreacting?
I think it's a very dangerous trend, especially violating open meeting laws. I think it's horrible because it's going to start setting precedent for other organizations to do the same thing.
So Governor McKee, as you pointed out, I guess bowed to political pressure and signed a statewide mask mandate for all public schools. And then he immediately asked that the General Assembly go into immediate special session to affirm his COVID-19 emergency powers. And House Speaker Sicarci and Senate President Ruggiero responded that the governor had been given, quote, all of his executive authority relative to health and safety. Now, is this merely, or was this merely an attempt by Governor McKee, do you think, to spread responsibility for what is obviously an unpopular measure among a large number of Rhode Islanders? And is there a remote chance, well, we've talked about this, is there a remote chance you'll be called in to address the governor's concern, Representative Casimiro?
I don't think there was anything really nefarious in what the governor said. I think he misspoke. I don't think he did it to spread any blame or anything like that. I just think he misspoke.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the governor realized that there was the legality was dubious in his executive order and the repercussions of that executive order, and was hoping to have it codified into law by the General Assembly, so the quote unquote the blood would be on our hands. Mm-hmm. And I'm thankful that the leadership of the Assembly took the position that they did, because it would have been completely inappropriate. And in fact, if we went in for anything, I would be asking that we would be rescinding some more of his executive authority and some of the executive orders that are in place.
Now, both Governors Raimondo and McKee have declared and extended emergency powers with dubious constitutionality. And the legislature, frankly, stood kind of idly by and didn't do a lot about it. And it wasn't until the executive branch suggested it had the sole authority to spend the $1 billion+ in federal pandemic relief that the leadership sprang into action. So wrote Mike Stenhouse of the Center for Freedom and Prosperity in a recent Projo op-ed. He says that a provision in the budget for 2022 was slipped in that ended the governor's emergency power. Is that why McKee waited so long before he acted? What is your reaction to that comment about, like, follow the money? The whole battle was over who was going to get to spend the...
You know, I mean, the legislature has the constitutional authority. We have the purse strings. That's our responsibility constitutionally. And the executives is to execute. So I think whenever there comes a discussion of, or a question of who has the authority, or who's the appropriate party to determine expenditures, I, a little selfishly as a legislator, I'm always going to say constitutionally it belongs in the legislature. So I think that is a key element to that dynamic there, that, yeah, the legislature must understand where the money's being allocated and how it's being used.
I absolutely agree. It's not up to one person to decide where that money's going and how it's going to be spent. I absolutely think we have to have our checks and balances in place, and the legislature does own that responsibility.
When Governor Raimondo, I believe the constitutional authority is to have an emergency declaration for how many, is it 90 days, or there's a time limit on, she can do it, or he can do it one time, but it kept getting extended, and nothing was done about it, so.
I think you're going to see that with all the new variants coming out in the with COVID-19. Every time there's another variant. Like I was just talking about a Peruvian one on the phone just now. Every time you see a different variant come out, I think there's going to be an opportunity for them to extend their emergency orders.
I frankly think that's a completely inappropriate use of emergency executive orders. If people research this, they're literally using a wartime statute to seize this power for the executive to essentially do whatever they want to do. The emergency is over. We are no longer in a pandemic. We are in an endemic. This is not going away ever. It will be like the flu. It will be like smallpox. It will be like all of those things that are still out there in corners of the world. Every year there's there's a new flu shot, because every year there's a new flu strain. This will be no different. We have to end this state of emergency because we are not in a state of emergency. We need to be careful, we need to do things the right way, and we need to work collaboratively towards goals that will keep people healthy and attack the issues at hand appropriately. But to give fiat power to the executive is absolutely inappropriate, and it was abused by the former administration. And I'm hoping our budget article will stop any further abuse from any future administrations.
And to my colleague's point, I think it's really important that we do have to move this state forward, and it's not happening very quickly. No. And I do want to keep everybody safe. I am not going to go around asking people what their vaccination status is, although I hope people get vaccinated. But we do have to move forward. I mean, people are going to be losing their unemployment benefits next weekend. People are still out of work. It's just we got to move forward. Businesses are closing. We got to move forward.
A kind of a related thing, as you know, the moratorium on evictions was expired, and then obviously the CDC director exceeded her authority. The Supreme Court came down and said, you have no authority to extend this. And now there's activist groups in Rhode Island saying, this is still a terrible situation. You can't evict people. Any reaction to that?
I'll jump right in. I mean, I have been a property owner and a evil landlord since 1992, and I understand the dynamic there. I, at this current time, do not have any rental properties. I liquidated a few years, thank God, before this pandemic, because frankly, I probably would have lost many of them. Landlords are not these evil money mongers that people like to make them out to be. Oftentimes, properties are literally running hand to mouth. If you don't get that rent check, you cannot pay your bills. Right. So the devastation to those who made very smart investments in rental real estate has been vast. And if they continue this, the bankruptcies are just going to flip, and those people will then be homeless. And it's not solving a problem, it's transferring a problem.
I guess my question is, what if the landlord cannot make the mortgage payments, then now the banks are sitting there with a non-performing loan.
Absolutely.
And if they foreclose, then they're going to be faced with the same problem, because if the tenant is in, they're not paying rent, it's a non-performing asset. They can't even get them out, because who's going to buy the property?
I don't want to see people thrown out on the street. I don't think anybody wants to see that. But I don't think there's an easy answer to this, because of what you just pointed out. With people have to pay their mortgages, and if they're not getting the income, how do they do that? I don't want to see anybody thrown out in the streets. We already have a huge homelessness population. We have a housing crisis. It's just, I don't know what the easy answer to this one is.
Speaking of the housing crisis, as a side note, I remember when Governor McKee offered to take in some of the Afghan refugees, which is certainly a noble cause. He was asked, well, where are we going to put them? Well, we don't know the scope of the problem yet. We seem to have a homeless problem. People can't find, quote, affordable housing. And if we bring in these people, which is certainly a noble and worthy gesture, we have to have a place for them. I
asked that question myself. I mean, it is a noble gesture, and that's what this country is founded on. Yeah. But where are we going to put them?
Yeah.
Where are we going to put them?
And there was no answer. So I'm going to change gears, because we've got about 5 minutes. Representative Patricia Morgan was on this program a while back, and she talked about a bill that she introduced that would prohibit the teaching, and I'm going to quote, of divisive concepts. And she said that was met with derision by the Education Committee chairman, who I think is also the chairman of the State Democratic Party. And all the Democrats on that committee actually were taking verbal shots at her for doing this. And now we have reports from South Kingstown, Westerly, Exeter, and North Kingstown, in addition to Providence, that there's an effort to introduce critical race and gender theory into the curriculum. Does critical race and gender discrimination theory belong in Rhode Island public schools, Representative Casimiro?
I'm not on the Education Committee anymore. I didn't hear Representative Morgan's her bill, the discussion around it, or anything like that, so I would need to know more. And I don't, frankly, know enough about critical race theory to comment on it. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a school issue. That should be left to the schools. and the school leadership to decide what they want to teach and what they don't want to teach. I don't feel it's a General Assembly issue.
You know, as a general rule, I think the majority of people who are talking about critical race theory right now lack a thorough enough understanding of exactly what it is. It's been misrepresented by a lot of folks. I will say this year we did pass a bill for African American heritage, which I think was 100% appropriate, 100% beneficial to the fabric of society, and it was appropriate. I don't know what CRT proposes to add or take from any curriculum. I would attack it on its merits if it were ever put in front of me, or its lack of merits were put in front of me. But I think we can, as a legislature, we can fill in the holes that need to be filled in, like we did with the African Heritage History Bill. Again, a very critical and needed and timely piece of legislation that accomplished the goal that it was set out to do. So I don't think we need the derision and the divisiveness around a particular issue like CRT or whatever to stop us from doing the right thing. We've demonstrated we can do the right thing.
About 3 minutes left. Should the ban on charter schools be lifted, Representative?
So there isn't a ban on charter schools. The Senate passed a ban, but it didn't pass on the House. There are some charter schools out there that are very, very successful, but I think we need to be focused on our public schools. Look at what's going on in Providence. It's a disaster, and there's no end in sight. So why can't we take some of those good ideas from charter schools and apply them to school departments like Providence? But there is no ban on charter schools. Let's focus on making our public schools successful.
I myself support charter schools wholeheartedly. I support school choice wholeheartedly. I support school vouchers wholeheartedly. If I were still living in Providence with my small children and we're faced with the idea of sending them to a school where the math proficiency is literally 4.3%, I would want a choice for my children. And I want to be able to offer those choices, whether it's charter, parochial, vouchers to go to another district that isn't underperforming. But we need to do something. With the Johns Hopkins report came out in 2019. And granted, there was this whole international pandemic in the interim, but nonetheless, we know what the issues are. It was articulated clearly, and I've seen zero progress in the city of Providence, and with, frankly, the new commissioner on addressing the fundamental issues that put Providence where it is. And it's not just Providence, by the way. It is throughout the entire state to a degree. But Providence, I think, really brought the whole issue to focus for everyone to see that we're failing our children, and it will take generations, and we can't afford to lose generations of children to get back to where we need to be.
I agree. We're failing miserably in Providence, and I agree that the commissioner is not doing enough in Providence. We have seen no progress in 3 years.
Well, I want to thank both Representative Casimiro and Representative Chippendale for coming back once again for this edition of State of the State. And we probably won't have a special session, but maybe we get into the next session in the fall and winter. We can come back again and give us an idea of what's coming next year.
I'd love to. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you.
And thank you, audience, for watching this edition of State of the State.